A poised, powerful black CEO walks into a private estate to finalize a $700 million deal. But what she faces isn't just business, it's open humiliation. They underestimated her. They mocked her. They tried to break her, but they forgot. One thinks is the one holding the pen. The sleek black SUV eased up the gravel driveway, tires crunching softly under its weight as it approached the sprawling countryside estate. The mansion stood tall white pillars, sprawling gardens, and a flag fluttering lazily in the wind like a monument to old money and inherited power. The car came to a stop, and after a brief pause, the back door opened. Out stepped the CEO, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that contrasted beautifully with her skin. Her posture was calm and composed, her presence unmistakable. She didn't arrive with fanfare or an entourage, only with a quiet confidence. That turned heads wherever it went, but not here. The valet didn't rush to open her door. The butler at the front entrance didn't greet her with a smile. The house staff, perfectly aligned and rehearsed, barely nodded before motioning for her to follow. Every look she received was polite but hollow, the kind reserved for someone they didn't think would last long. They didn't see power in her. They only saw difference. And in that difference, they felt superiority. Inside the grand dining room, the billionaire family was already seated for brunch, porcelain plates, fresh croissants, imported cheeses, and laughter flowing like champagne. No one stood when she entered. No one reached out a hand or made space for her at the table. A butler carried an extra chair from the corner of the room and set it down a few inches too far from the main circle. The gesture was small, but loud. She said nothing. Instead, she adjusted the chair herself, gently dragging it into alignment with the others. The sound of the legs scraping against the marble floor silenced the laughter for a second, just long enough for one of the men at the table to glance over, then smirk. "We thought you'd send your boss," he said casually, buttering his toast. She met his eyes and smiled. "I am the boss." The words floated into the air, calm and unshaken, and for a brief second, something flickered in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, that the game wouldn't be as easy as he thought. But the tone of the brunch didn't change. Instead of engaging her directly, the family began directing every question to the assistant beside her. A white man in his 30s who looked increasingly uncomfortable. She let it happen at first, observing, calculating, measuring, just how far they'd go. "Would you mind explaining the revenue breakdown from your last quarter?" One of the elder members asked the assistant, completely bypassing her. She waited. The assistant looked to her. She didn't flinch. Eventually, he gestured toward her and said, "She's the one who built the model. You should ask her." Reluctantly, the question was redirected. But even then, it came with a condescending tilt. "So," the same man said, swirling his espresso, "where did you go to school?" She answered directly, naming not just one, but two of the most prestigious business institutions in the world. Another leaned in. "And who funded your company?" "You know, seed capital, those early angel rounds?" She kept her voice level. "I did." They blinked, confused. "No, I mean, at the very beginning I did," she repeated. An awkward silence followed. It's the kind that exposes assumptions too loud to ignore. Still, she didn't lose her poise. Her presence remained. Undisturbed, her smile unfading. But under the surface, she took mental notes, not of the questions, but of the smirks, the chuckles, the barely concealed disbelief. Then came the moment one of them said it. The line that wrapped the entire brunch in one neat bow. "You're very well spoken." It was said like a compliment. It landed like a slap. She simply replied thank you and took a sip of her tea. Brunch continued. Deals weren't discussed. Numbers weren't reviewed. The atmosphere remained performative, a show of power from people who believed it was inherited, it's not earned. As the plates were cleared, one of the family members stood and said, "We've arranged rooms for all our guests. Some of us are staying in the East Wing. We've prepared something for you in the North Annex. Bit older, but private." She nodded politely and followed a staff member through winding hallways and up a back staircase. The room they offered was tidy, but clearly forgotten, dusty curtains. It's an antique heater and no hot water in the bathroom. Far cry from the luxury suites offered to the others. She didn't complain. She simply looked around, placed her bag gently on the bed, and walked to the window. Outside, the estate stretched endlessly. Money in every blade of grass. Arrogance in every brick. But none of it intimidated her, because she wasn't there to impress them. She was there to choose whether they were worthy of her. The grand dining hall shimmered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers, polished oak furniture, walls adorned with oil paintings of ancestors, long dead but still worshipped in name. The air smelled of roasted duck, fine wine, and entitlement. The dinner, announced as a celebration of the upcoming merger, felt more like a coronation for themselves than a meeting of equals. The CEO arrived exactly on time, but the energy in the room shifted only slightly when she entered. Conversations did not pause. No heads turned in acknowledgement. Only a butler with a clipboard pointed her silently to her seat, not beside the host or near the center of power, but all the way at the far end of the long banquet table, just a few feet from the swinging doors of the kitchen. She didn't flinch. She walked with grace, each step deliberate, each movement precise. Her seat had no name card, unlike the others, and her place setting was misaligned. Still, she sat, straightened her napkin, and smiled with the same composed dignity she had carried all day. The assistant assigned to accompany her looked visibly irritated, but she gave them a quick, reassuring glance, a silent message that said, "Stay calm, stay steady," as the meal commenced. Servers moved like clockwork, offering glasses of aged wine and champagne flutes to the guests, bypassing her without hesitation. Toasts were raised for continued legacy in keeping, business in the right hands. Silverware clinked, laughter echoed, but her glass remained untouched. When she was finally served, it was last, a lukewarm dish, slightly off from the main course. She made no complaint. The conversation flowed freely around her, rich in arrogance and steeped in coded language. A guest, one of the older men with a silver pocket square and a voice like gravel, turned toward her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be the diversity clause in the contract," he said, almost casually. The table chuckled. She blinked once, slowly, and responded with no edge in her voice. "I'm the reason your contract exists at all." It landed like a soft blade. No blood drawn, but everyone felt it. After a pause, she launched into a clear, articulate summary of her company's vision, its direction, its growth curve, its unmatched agility in tech markets. She spoke about long-term sustainability, about transforming legacy industries into modern engines of innovation. It was precise, powerful, and surgically intelligent. But before the weight of her words could settle, the eldest son, barely in his 30s, dressed like a politician, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "That's cute," he said, raising his wine glass. "But we've been running empires since before your people could vote." There was a silence, a sharp one, and then a sudden burst of laughter erupted from the other end of the table. Not nervous laughter, not confused, deliberate, full-bellied laughter. The kind that says you're not one of us and never will be. Her assistant's knuckles whitened around their fork. Jaw clenched so tight it could have cracked. But she placed a calm hand on their wrist and gave a soft shake of her head. "Here, not now. Not like this." She took a sip of water, her hands steady. The son was still laughing, unaware that in that moment he'd handed her all the leverage she'd need. The rest of the dinner proceeded with the same undercurrent of disregard. Guests ignored her unless they were mocking her. She said less and observed more. And when the final dish was cleared and cigars were brought out for those who smoked, one of the family's legal advisors approached her with a leather folder. Inside were the updated merger papers. She flipped through them quickly, her eyes trained, her mind scanning every word. Whole sections had been altered, profit splits adjusted, control clauses rewritten, protective terms removed. She pointed to a key change and asked, "When was this revision made?" The advisor, a smug man in a navy suit, barely looked up. "It's just last night. Nothing serious. Standard adjustments. You wouldn't need to worry about the legalese." That sentence was deliberate, dismissive, designed to provoke. She closed the folder and smiled politely. "I'll have my team review this overnight. We won't be signing anything until every change is addressed." The advisor shrugged as if it didn't matter. Of course. But just don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't stay open forever." She stood without answering, thanked the host for the evening with flawless courtesy, and made her way toward the hallway. Her assistant followed closely behind, silent but visibly frustrated. Near the stairs, just before she reached the corridor that led to her forgotten guest room, a quiet voice called out. She turned. It was a younger woman from the family, standing awkwardly beside a piano, wringing her hands together. Her expression was apologetic, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to say I'm sorry. It's about all of this." The CEO looked at her. "They're scared of you," the woman said. "That's why they act this way." The CEO didn't respond right away. She studied her, not with judgment, but with the tired patience of someone who'd heard versions of this confession before. She nodded once. "Then they should be," she said gently, before turning away. That night, alone in her cold room, she opened the folder again under the dim yellow lamp. She marked the pages with red tabs, scribbled notes in the margins, and highlighted every line of betrayal. They had underestimated her. They thought this dinner would weaken her, but all it had done was clarify one thing: they weren't worthy of the deal, and she would make sure they remembered that forever. The sun rose, crisp and clear, sharp contrast to the tension that had been building behind closed doors. At the local university's business school, a modern glass building with soaring ceilings and sunlight streaming through tall windows, a boardroom was being prepped, not in a corporate tower, but on neutral ground. It was her request, a place rooted in knowledge, not legacy. A place where truth would hold more weight than tradition. She arrived early, dressed not to impress, but to lead. No grand gestures, no theatrics. Just precision, clarity, and purpose. Her team set up quietly, while students, alumni, and financial analysts began filtering in, curious about the sudden invite to an open corporate session. Word had spread that something was about to unfold, and it wouldn't be ordinary. The Billionaire family arrived minutes before the scheduled time, flanked by their lawyers and PR advisors. Their faces were tight, their movements clipped, but they expected her to be desperate. They expected her to negotiate behind closed doors, to accept the changes they had slipped into the contract. Instead, they found themselves stepping into a packed lecture hall turned conference room with rows of business students, investors, and professors already seated. Cameras were subtly placed for internal company record-keeping, and every eye turned toward them as they entered. Their discomfort was immediate. This wasn't their turf. She welcomed them with calm professionalism, motioning them to the front row. No malice, no smugness, just control. A large screen lit up behind her as she stepped forward and greeted everyone in the room. Her voice carried not just confidence, but gravity. "What defines a company's legacy," she began, "isn't its past. It's the character it shows when no one is watching." The opening slide appeared, the logos of both companies side by side. But then, slowly, her company's logo began to fade out, leaving only theirs. Then came a series of headlines, spreadsheets, and SEC filings. She walked them through the timeline of events leading up to the proposed merger, not as a deal between equals, but as a strategic intervention. Her firm, she revealed, had uncovered evidence of a tech sector investment the Billionaire family's company had made, one that had gone disastrously wrong. Billions were quietly hemorrhaging through shell partnerships, and a collapse was imminent. If it went public, it would not only tank their company's valuation, but drag down affiliated firms and destroy investor confidence for years. She paused, then clicked to the next slide. And so she said evenly, "We designed the merger to stabilize your firm, absorb the liability, and quietly restructure your holdings. In short, we weren't merging. We were rescuing." Murmurs swept through the audience. A few students exchanged wide-eyed glances. Investors leaned forward. The family stiffened. Their eldest son shifted in his seat, arms folded, lips tight. She continued, "This deal wasn't about us needing access. You already have that. We weren't looking for validation. We've already outperformed every benchmark you set. What we offered was grace, a lifeline, chance for you to save face, while keeping your empire intact." A hush fell over the room as she clicked to another slide, one filled with public documents that linked board members from the billionaire family's firm to questionable trades, insider movement, and unreported losses. Just facts. It's verified, time-stamped, undeniable. She turned back to the crowd. "This morning I had every reason to walk away. Last night I was given a seat by the kitchen, laughed at for leading my company, handed a manipulated contract, and told not to worry about the legalese. But I did worry, and I always will. That's what leadership is. It's worrying for the people your decisions affect. Not just your shareholders, your employees, your clients, your future." Her words were slow, deliberate, and sharp. She turned back to the family seated in the front row, their posture now rigid, their eyes narrowed. They weren't used to being called out, especially not by someone they had dismissed as beneath them. She let the silence stretch. No one dared interrupt. "I came here today not to salvage a deal," she said finally, "but to ask a single question." She walked toward the front of the stage, letting her words settle in the air like dust. "Now that I've seen your character up close, tell me, why should I invest in you?" The question landed like a thunderclap. No one answered. The eldest son shifted again, looking down. One of the legal advisors opened his mouth, then closed it. A few of the financial backers in the audience scribbled notes furiously. The students, watching history unfold before them, sat frozen, captivated. She didn't wait for a response. She turned, handed the remote to her assistant, and walked off stage, leaving a silence so complete it echoed. The family remained seated, stunned. What had started as a game of power had turned into a public reckoning, and they had invited her into their world to humiliate her, but she had turned the table, exposed their weaknesses, and walked away with every ounce of control. And she hadn't raised her voice once. The estate was no longer quiet. Silence that had once cloaked its halls was replaced by frantic voices, ringing phones and footsteps echoing across marble floors. Panic had settled in like a storm. The family huddled behind closed doors, reviewing the fallout from the university presentation. Emails flooded in from investors. Board members demanded answers. Analysts on TV were already dissecting every frame of the meeting. Footage had leaked. Someone in the audience had uploaded it. Now it was everywhere. Headlines questioned the family's judgment. Financial outlets covered the story with morbid fascination. A billion-dollar empire exposed. Its arrogance unraveled by a single woman's refusal to be disrespected. The damage wasn't just financial. It was personal, reputational, generational. The calls began immediately. The matriarch left 2 voicemails in the same hour. The eldest son sent a formal apology through their PR team. Their lawyer emailed new drafts, this time with more favorable terms. Her terms. They offered equity, additional control, even full leadership of the merged company. Emissaries were dispatched to her corporate offices, bearing gifts, handwritten letters, and empty smiles. Some tried appealing to business logic, others to sentiment. But none of them understood that what they had broken couldn't be bought back. She responded only once, in a clear, typed message, with no frills, no emotion, no room for misinterpretation. She wrote, "The price isn't just financial, it's moral, and you failed." Then she closed her laptop, stood from her desk, and walked into the boardroom, where her own team waited. They stood as she entered, a small gesture of respect they never forgot, never failed to show. She nodded for them to sit, and they did. Eyes sharp, ready, she pulled up a new presentation, this one not about the failed deal, but the path forward. The screen lit up with a simple title, Joint Venture Proposal, Phase 1. She explained how weeks before the mansion meeting, she had quietly opened discussions with another firm, smaller, privately owned. Family-run, ethical, hungry, black-owned. A company whose principles mirrored hers. She had kept them as a contingency, not because she doubted herself, but because she had learned long ago to never depend on the good faith of the powerful. Now that backup was her new priority. The room leaned in as she described the structure of the partnership. Instead of absorbing a decaying empire, her company would build something new. Clean, scalable, community-rooted. The other firm's founders had agreed, inspired by her values, impressed by her discipline. The deal would be worth less than the $700 million merger on paper, but its worth couldn't be measured in dollars. It was measured in alignment, in trust, in the kind of legacy she actually wanted to build. Her team approved it unanimously. Within days, the press got wind of the decision. But this time, the story wasn't just about a deal gone wrong. It was about a revolution done right. Business blogs, financial news networks, even cultural outlets covered it. Asterisk Black CEO walks away from billionaire deal, builds record-breaking. Black-owned partnership instead, asterisk. The numbers weren't just good, they were inspiring. Investments poured in. Young entrepreneurs flooded her company's inbox, asking for internships, mentorship, interviews. Universities reached out to request speaking engagements. Parents wrote in, saying their daughters had found a new role model. Meanwhile, the old family's company began to spiral. Stockholders lost confidence. Media outlets unearthed past incidents that mirrored their recent behavior, patterns long buried under money and power. Regulatory agencies began taking interest. The family tried to save face, appearing on talk shows, issuing statements, writing op-eds, but the damage had settled in too deep. They were no longer the face of business tradition, they were the cautionary tale, and she didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply moved forward. Weeks later, she stood before a new crowd. Not investors, not shareholders, but students. Young faces, future builders. She had been invited to speak at a national entrepreneurship summit, and as she took the stage, the auditorium fell into silence. Not the silence of fear or confusion, the silence of attention. The kind earned, not given. She looked out over the crowd and began simply. Power doesn't always come from saying yes, she said. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. She told them the story not in the headlines terms, but in real terms. What it meant to be dismissed, to be talked over, to be the only one in the room carrying both strategy and restraint. She told them about the guest room with no hot water, the seat by the kitchen, the contract, rewritten behind her back. She told them how easy it would have been to sign anyway, to accept the deal, take the money, ignore the disrespect. She hadn't. Because dignity, she said, is not a line item. It's not a clause. It's the foundation. She ended with a message. So quiet, so calm, it echoed louder than any roar. Don't let anyone tell you that dignity is negotiable. Sometimes, walking away is the greatest deal you'll ever make. The room erupted in applause, and as the camera panned out, the stage lights dimming behind her, soft music faded in. It's not triumphant, not sad, just steady like the woman herself. More powerful stories like this, subscribe to Simply Stories.